Journeys Ahead, Draft 2, Chapter 8, The Fox. Written and narrated by T.S. ProArt. With a shiny blue and powerful flare of light, Void's dimensional passage portal opened wide into a brand new world. Leaping out of its enticing aura, the spark landed to his feet on solid ground, while Jaida flopped forwards and went face first into the soil. Oof! She yelped, while literally eating the dirt. In a stunned and worried shock, Void turned his ocean blue sights downwards to look upon his friend, who just appeared to accept her fate in an unmoving position. Yeah, you gotta watch your step when exiting the portal, Freckles. Sorry. Void expressed with a cringing face, before leaning downwards and helping the girl back to her feet. Thanks for the memo. Jaida replied in embarrassment, as she spat out some grass. As the wonders of nature flew from her teeth, the guitarist's eyes twirled in their sockets for a moment, as the relaxation of where she had been took over her soul. Whoa, was the long and drawn-out word that left Jaida's lips, as Void began to march on ahead into this brand new world. They both had entered into a patch of large woods that, in truth, looked like a Valentine's card come to life. The grass was as white as a winter morning, shimmering with crystal-akin glints in the faint sunlight from above. The trees were all blooming with flower-petal leaves that gave off a cherry-sweet scent. It was as though a rose patch had blossomed into a magnificent spire. These trees were everywhere, ranging from small little shrubs to large and mighty white bark logs. Before their eyes and below their feet was a long and narrow path of stone. This structure looked to have been there for ages, for its form was riddled in grayed, sun-dried colors mixed in with cobblestone cracks. At this path side were also tall and threatening-looking statues. These figures looked akin to the Lavin wolves back on Jaida's Earth, but were instead foxes with 6 long tails each. They looked akin to a mix between samurais and ninjas, clad in sharp steel armor with spears, naganatas, and katanas. They all even wore battle-hardened masks that created the same shape of the muzzled face beneath. They were gorgeous looking, truly a sight to take in, they both thought. Wow, so this isn't Earth? Jaida questioned as she slowly marched forwards while patting off the dirt that now stained her skirt. Nope. This is a world in a different dimension, Freckles. The home to the spectral fox. And it seems as though we entered right on their front or back doorstep. Void explained while maneuvering forwards and down the path, being about 2 or so feet in front of Jaida. Legends say that you can hear and or feel the spirits in the air if you listen really closely. To his words, Jaida tilted her head to the side, curious to see if this had been true, only to be greeted by something else in response. What Jaida heard was nothing. It was an empty and spaced silence that seemed off for such a woodland place. Although this silence was from nature herself, the wind was audibly present, its breeze greeting Jaida in a soft whoosh, while it gently caressed its chilly hands through the guitarist's toasty hair. However, outside of that and the clack of hard stone beneath their shoes, there was no noise. No bugs, no birds, not even the sound of a woodpecker hammering away at the faded bark. It was eerie, and Void picked up on this too. Something doesn't feel right. The spark suddenly said with an immediate halt upon his march. Extending an arm out, Void stopped Jaida from moving too, leaving them both to just silently listen in to the world. Yeah, I can feel that. The orange-haired angel agreed, while tapping into the environment using her subspace. The world was alien for Jaida. Her normal sense of yellow stars and orange hazes had reverted into a hot pink to lavender-like essence. The building blocks here were different, yet followed the same laws as her fire. Cosmic fire, she corrected inside. Fuzzy, Jida felt. Very fuzzy, tingly. Something was off. Well, ain't this just a wonderful feeling? Hop into a new world, and the next thing you know, you suddenly feel like it isn't right. Can you believe that? Jida asked in a nervous chuckle as the two kids now stood side by side, not on the offense or defense, but more so curious. I can, except this time I'm not alone, was all the spark could reply with as he slowly craned his blue eyes to the side and fell into a state of tension. Oh no. Left the depths of his mouth, getting Jida to turn herself and see what he had been looking at. Within the thicket of all the trees, one stood out among the others. For this strand of nature, it was layered in what appeared to be TV static. The outline of the plant was per standard, although now its bark and leaves were just covered in flickering whites and grays. Glimpses of different hued electricity strands buzzed off its glowing form, holding the same aura and power as the tears themselves. After they noticed this one, the two began to take note of the others. Although faint, there were more trees in the same condition as the first. A lot of them, the kids realized, just blending in with the rest of the natural world. Jida held a look of absolute confusion, while Void, his face gave off the impression that he had just witnessed a car crash. A terrible accident that had no warning or preparation. Even though his skin was snow white, Jida could tell he had gone pale. The look in his eyes as they shook back and forth said one thing and one thing alone. Glitches. Blue? The guitars nervously asked, before they were both drawn to the boom of a distant explosion. Setting their sights back forwards, the two kids watched in absolute dread as a puffball of smoke arose over the woodland trees. It hadn't been too far off in the distance. It would be a little hike, but so long as they worked fast, they would be able to make it. Stay close, Void exclaimed as he began running his way towards the scene. Aye, aye, Captain, Jida said back, while they both now sprinted down the path that was watched over by numerous stone guardians. In an orange flash, Jida warped herself and Void to be closer to where the blast had gone off, which resulted in them coming across an unexpected sight. The two of them now found that they were outside the ancient grounds of a massive, dojo-like temple. The structure was facing away from them both, towering high into a partially cloudy sky. Its design was reminiscent of ancient Japanese structures that were within many worlds. Having been crafted like a large cake, the building had 7 floors, each one getting smaller and smaller as it neared the top, where they were all donned in angled red slanted roofs. Although only being the backside, Void and Jida could make out its beautifully chiseled craftsmanship. The dojo was made out of soft pink wood that had religious carvings and imagery littering its exterior design. It was of spectral foxes, praying, fighting, something that the Spark had seen in many different forms across his dimensional hunts. All around remained the same blossoming trees and those of static, now spaced out and more streamlined as opposed to a whole forest. Mountains rose high past the clouds in the distance that overlooked a village and a massive lake from in front of the temple. A lake that was glowing. Where is everyone? Jida pondered aloud with a cautious hand raised to her chin, while taking note of the blast smoke itself. Massive waves of tar-colored fumes were rapidly exiting out of the temple's front side, as well as its back windows. There seemed to be some kind of fire on the scene. Yet, there was no one running or screaming. The village didn't appear abandoned, though. It all seemed up to date, as well as being on fire too. What was going on here? Jaida thought inside, while Void stood with a cold chill trickling down his metal spine. That's it. Keep it moving. Come on. Don't stop the hustle. Let's go. A crackling voice called from the front, masked by both the smoke and temple flames. It took Jaida a long moment to understand, but Void already knew it was him. Stay close and be quiet, Void demanded with a cold stare to Jaida, getting her to make a zipping motion to her mouth and then following it up with a thumbs up. Reaching down, the spark took the guitarist by her hand, which she didn't mind, and together, they silently crouched and made their way over to some thrown over wood by the temple's front corner half. This was a perfect viewing space, whilst also acting as a good concealment from whatever danger lied ahead. This wood looked to actually have been a bunch of storage boxes, ones used to hold weapons and other kinds of trinkets. Being the shade of a low brown, it matched with the approaching sand from the water's bay, which to Void and Jaida's shock, was now a sea of static. Keep up the flames, guys! I think this planet will serve well as a great getaway spot. Just gotta clear out some of this trash and mythology junk. Craning their tense eyes forwards, Void and Jaida were able to see him. The king. The monster. Lotus. Sitting upon a makeshift throne of chairs, wood and stone, the king rested without shame, like the tyrant he was. This was the first time Void had properly seen Lotus in person since Salvaheim's fall, while this was also Jaida's first ever impression for a physical greet. Lotus's real form matched with his outline projections. He was humanoid, but in so many wrong and twisted ways. His body appeared akin to a glass sculpture, sharp, reflective, with hints of buzzing and deadly glowing power within. He had limbs akin to a human, but where each joint would be was instead an empty space, split apart to reveal burning static flesh and bones within. He was an imposing force, a whopping 15 feet tall off the ground. On his floating cubed head, there rested a burning orange flat eye that flickered and expressed itself to create, or rather resemble, emotions. It, like his head, was a square form, flat with two smaller obtuse four corners dancing inside its interior. At the center of it all was a tiny white pupil that buzzed with static and a lack of empathy. Is that Lotus? Jaida whispered, as they both continued to peek out over the box. Yes. Void answered with a cold breath, as they began to note many others. There were sour claws, polychromes, and other kinds of glitches. Waddling and stumbling around like zombies were stable glitches. These were the most common form of these creatures, literal static shapes taking life into odd humanoid forms. These smaller freaks all had different electric colors coming off their bodies, respectively. Reds, yellows, blues, purples, greens, any color. Beside them were what were known as unstable glitches. Large, beastly amalgamations that were just like the stables, but juiced up into monstrous giants. They had beady red eyes, crooked, lopsided teeth, sharp, bladed tendrils spewing from their spines, and an excessive amount of drool spilling from their glowing gums. Unstables were ugly and terrifying to put it best. The muscle segment from Lotus's kind. Finishing off this small portion of the king's army were two figures that were standing next to him, two that looked almost like the Mad Monarch himself. To his left was the second in command to the king, his sister, Solidius. Solidius was colored yellow as opposed to her brother's red. She had a similar glass-like body, but in a much more feminine shape. Even with separated floating limbs, she had a more physical curve to her body, with slimmer arms and legs. Instead of a cube-shaped head, Solidius instead had a pyramid. This physical trait had also been accompanied by an eye identical to Lotus's, but in the shade of blue. On the opposite half of the king was a jumble of glass shards and rectangles. 4 purple-shaded arms, a makeshift set of legs that were really just shattered glass keeping it up, that was all completed by tons of small, glowing green flat eyes. This was Lois's little brother, Calamity, a mess of a soul, shattered and torn apart by his family into what he had been now. Once a runt, always a runt, as one would say. These two had the same goal as their brother, to take over all that had ignored them. They both were second-hand pawns to his army, his subjects, the dark future of all life if failed to be stopped.
My lord, we found one in the valley. Many had fled, but we were able to capture this runaway.
A sour claw exclaimed from the side as it and several stables entered the scene from the thicket of trees. As they approached, Void and Jida craned their eyes and saw something that they weren't expecting. Clenched within the sour claw's crab-like mitts was a little girl, a young, spectral fox that was wide-eyed and terrified. She had a mix of blue and pink-red fur, tiny arms and legs, 6 little tails, and a baby-sized tunic that matched with her bright pink and terrified eyes. Is that a kid? Where are all the adults? Jida gasped through clenched and angered teeth as her constellations began to flare to life. Looking down to his feet, Void was able to note fallen katanas and naginatas upon the ground. They didn't look new. They had clearly been used before, if not hours ago, for some were stained with the static blood of the monsters that outnumbered them from afar. Upon seeing this, a feeling began to shift in Void's gut, turning it from anger to dread. During his gut spinner, Void took note of what had been around the weapons. It was chunks of red crystal, some still in the shape of limbs frozen mid-attack. Biggest note being a severed crystal hand that was still gripped tightly around one of the katana's hilts. Not again, was all Void could whisper as his mind snapped back to the fall of his world, seeing his fellow sparks be reduced to these same crystallized graves. Jida was oblivious to what he had been seeing, and for that, Void couldn't help but be thankful. Aw, what a cute little thing! Loda suddenly boasted as he snapped his fingers and entangled the little fox into a yellow ray of energy. The kid was now surrounded in flickering rectangles and multicolored static sparks, which terrified her poor soul even more. I've always wanted a puppy. Hey, remember how Father wouldn't allow it? The king asked in a distasteful way, with a turn towards his sister.
Very much. Although, it doesn't look to be up for play. I think we may be scaring her.
Celidia said with a smooth and slick voice as she caressed a set of sharp fingers across the fox's flinching head.
Oh, yes. Perhaps she could be useful in finding other resourceful realms. Train her under our own.
Calamity suggested as he moved his spider-looking body around the fox, looking akin to a crab.
Let me go, please.
The little one pleaded in a whimper as the 3 siblings and group of glitches all eyed her down with malice in their hearts. Void, what do we do? Jida questioned, eager to help this poor baby, while Void simply huffed and held her shoulder. Stay here. I didn't expect this. I'm getting that kid out of there, okay? Void suddenly said as he deployed his mother's battle helmet over his head. What? By yourself? Let me help you. Jida retorted with a sharp turn. Too risky right now. You haven't been up against many of these things yet, let alone the big 3. Stay here and wait for my word. The spark explained, while Jida glanced between him and the fox in need. What are you gonna do? To this ask, Void glanced from Jida and then back to the kid, who was now in the brink of tears by the looks of it. Deep inside, the spark felt something stirring. It was a mix of many things. hatred, sadness, and all kinds of fear. With those rose-shaded eyes in the fox, he could grab a sense of his very own self from years ago. It was the familiar, haunting face of dread. But that fear, it was the same fear he knew all too well. This kid's parents were surely gone, Voight thought inside. It was another wave of sorrow that engulfed him for being too late. This was his life, the spark thought. It seemed to always involve the loss of innocence and the death of innocence. Hang on, kiddo, Voight whispered before suddenly leaping over the boxes and landing before the glitches to Jaida's absolute shock. Let her go! Voight shouted, causing the glitches, Solidius, and Calamity to stand back in shock. However, Lotus merely tilted his head with a rather pleasant look in his eye. Ah! Was wondering when you'd show up. Been a hot minute since we've seen each other face to face, yeah? Lotus didn't sound fazed. He was talking as if Voight was a friend who had only been gone for a few minutes. No shock, dread, or anger. Just an eerie lack of emotion that would have been a 5-year-long span from being face to face. Turning her little body, the fox locked her pleading eyes with Voight's, causing the two of them to meet one another's gaze. Within what had to be about 4 to 5 seconds of silence, Voight and this child shared a passing thought. Although none spoke, this little one was able to read Voight's soul purely through his eyes alone. Eyes that were saying to her, I'm here to save you. Put her down, Voight demanded, as the other glitches began to surround him with angered stares. In response, Lotus raised his hand up high, which halted the monsters in their place. Chuckling, the king himself stood and then descended his throne. At his side, the fox continued to follow in her energy bubble, while all the glitches now bowed, even the siblings. Why? Lotus asked, as his eyes shifted upwards into a happy expression. Why should I? Look around you, baby horns. This world is already mine. The monster stated with a gesture to the world's newly bugged out aesthetic. Why care about this scrap of a memory? With a twirl in his hands, Lotus began to burn the bubble at its sides, creating a hot exterior that could burn the fox away at any given second. In reaction, the little one huddled into a shaking ball, while Voight's anger grew heavier. Drop her now, he said for a third time, while Jaida contemplated on whether or not she should jump in. Earn her, Lotus stated as he rolled his shoulders and cackled to himself once more. What? Voight asked with audible confusion, while the king continued to slowly move his lanky form towards the spark. Come on, show me what you've learned since we last talked face to face, the cube asked as his right arm suddenly shattered and elongated into an electrical, glass-bladed whip. Beat me in combat and I'll let the little runt go. Fail? I kill her as I had to your mom and dad. With that last sentence, Jaida, the fox, and all the other glitches watched as Voight's horn surged to life with a blue shine, along with an added activation of his battle axe. Stancing himself, Voight shouted out a sound that came from deep within his soul. It was a primal roar, something all sparks could do once provoked or threatened. The noise startled Jaida, while all the other glitches began to back away. From their mouths, or lack thereof, the sound of a chant began to arise. They all bellowed as a cold sweat poured down Jaida's brow. Oh, pieces, she whispered as tensions began to rise. Swinging his arm down, an audible crack erupted through the air as Lotus slashed his whip into the charred and dirty sandy beach. From the top shard's impact, a wave of sand arose in an arched shape, which showered the young spark in pellets of brown rocks and black pebbles. Yanking his weapon back like a snake fleeing a hawk, Lotus raised the strand of electric power up and over his head, whilst beginning to spin its lethal shards around in a violent display of authority. Round and round it went, until the glitch at last swung it forwards with another audible crack. Everything felt to slow down around the spark's vision, as he watched the red sharp blade of the weapon near his jugular. To evade, within the fraction of a second, Void charged his horns and unleashed a bright blue energy pulse. With this boost, he launched himself into a backflip and landed firmly upon his white self-sewn boots, throwing up even more sand to strike Lotus back. In absolute shock, Jida watched as her friend readied himself once more as the king swung his weapon again. Now coming in from a leftward slash, Void switched his axe from his right hand to be in his left, allowing for him to activate a Novarune shield. As glass met magic, a spark of blue light jolted itself to life, sending the whip flailing back and for Void to slide away in sudden stress. As this fight appeared to be getting red hot, Jida returned her orange glowing eyes back upon the little fox, who had been trapped, in which the two of them locked irises. Jida could feel the terror within the little one's stare. Like Void, she recognized it too, the realization that the life you once knew was now forever changed. It saddened Jida to her core. The fox looked so young, so innocent. Like Void, she couldn't sit by and let this happen. She had to help in some way. A way that she knew could work, if done right. Don't worry, sweetie. Just trust me here, okay? She whispered before closing her eyes and extending her hands outwards. With another pulse, Void launched himself towards the king and swung his axe down in a powerful rage-filled slash. With a visible grin to his pumpkin glowing eye, Lotus quickly flipped sidewards from the little spark as his axe released a sharp pulse of sapphire spark magic. Wasting no time, Void lifted his trusty weapon back up and threw it towards Lotus. In another flip, the king evaded again and then again as the steel blade boomeranged back around. Catching his axe, Void angrily huffed and then opened up two hatches below his spark crest. From within his armor interior were a dual set of missile holders. Ones he designed himself to fire out as small projectiles of built-up spark essence. Clenching his fist to fire, a wave of tiny blue rockets exploded out of the ports with little tufts of smoke trailing after. Flying through the air like a barrage of whistling birds, these little bombs erupted around the king in a deadly power exhaust, some even scratching and slightly cracking Lotus's glassy shell. Giggling like a freak, Lotus raised his free hand and snapped his talon-sharp fingers. From this act, several staticky cracks opened up from thin air around Void, which led the sharp red spikes shooting out like automatic thorns. Gruffing, the spark began to evade these strikes, although Jida continued to use her powers in a way that she was still trying to understand. Come on. Come on. Groaned the guitarist as sparks of orange light began to arise from around the fox, leaving the little one nervously curious. Alright, enough dancing. Let's see if this puts things into perspective. Lotus shouted as he disengaged the thorns and then immediately slashed his whip again in a faster motion. From the sudden attack, Void was unable to move fast enough and found himself suddenly getting entangled within sharp glass. Before he even had time to react, Lotus swung him up into the air, then back down so hard and knocked the wind from Void's lungs. His helmet visor then immediately alerted with a red flash, warning the spark that his left shoulder joint had popped out of place and that several ribs had cracked. Without any time to react, Lotus then swung Void around once, twice, then with a third, released him with such force he crashed against one of the many fox statues that littered the land, this one being front and center before the dojo, once made of gold, now to rubble. Falling stomach first, Void hit the cobblestone pathway that led to this once grand structure, whilst the crumbling debris of gold clanked upon his pathetic body. All around, the glitches began to laugh, bellowing like hungry hogs on a farm, like rich tyrants downplaying the poor. Void was like a kid with a mere-rigged black belt thrown into a real boxing match. He had skill, when faced with a force so large and powerful, he was like a cow walking into a butcher shop. "Oh, did you fall down?" Lotus asked as he transformed his whip back into a regular arm and hand. "Are you gonna cry? Come on, you'll heal. Stand up, baby horns. I thought you'd be better than this." Lotus exclaimed as Void, with angered, restraining pouts, slowly stood to a kneeling position, using his axe as leverage. Reaching his right arm around, he clutched his now out-of-socket left shoulder, and with a huff and shove, locked it back into place. The spark shouted, spitting the interior of his helmet, while also focusing on self-healing. "Stop, think, breathe, heal," he said inside, whilst weakly eyeing Lotus. "Do you all see this? This is what you're so afraid of. This is who keeps killing our kind? Come on, people! He's like a rat to a snake!" Lotus loudly exclaimed, causing laughter from his subjects to arise once again. "This is the last of the sparks. A pathetic little whimper as opposed to a roar. They'd be so embarrassed. Guess that's one thing you don't have to face. If only your mom and dad could see you now." Lotus teased the spite and lowered the spark's confidence, which for a 15-year-old loner really began to sink deep into his blue soul. "You seriously think you can beat me? I didn't even use my static electricity! You got taken out with you got taken out within moments!" Lotus ranted on as he rolled his eye with a gleeful expression. Scowling behind his mask, Void stared down the king, like a lion tracking their prey, wanting to say something more, the curse, to prove him wrong. But instead, Void merely fell back to his knees, tired, too tired, the young kid groaned to himself, while his enemy adjusted his lanky form and brought the fox's bubble close by. "Let this be a final warning, boy! Back away now, and let us continue on with our little cleanup, per se. Death only hurts for a moment. No need to fight to stop it." Clenching his ruby-red fist, Lotus suddenly ignited the static around the bubble to erase the little fox. The look in her eyes was almost of a pitiful acceptance. "No!" Void choked out as he extended a hand forwards towards the little one. "Please don't! She's just a kid!" He desperately pleaded, while retracting his helmet, revealing his tear-tinted eyes to the army of monsters. "You think I care? Life is all the same. Just weak and fragile vessels holding tint wisps of souls. You're all the same. Self-privileged, undeserving little footnotes in this joke of a plot. Open your eyes, kid." With these final words, Lotus gave one last stern look to the fox, who was now closing her eyes and awaiting upon the inevitable. Yet, before the entirety of the static could take hold, the spectral fox was suddenly ignited to an orange light and disappeared within a flash. "What?" Lotus shouted in sudden shock, while all the other glitches reacted with gasps and confusing grunts. Where'd she go?" The king inquired with a baffled look to his eye, when they all suddenly heard the sound of a warp from above. In an orange flash, everyone watched as Jida Woods fell from the air with a burning flare to her hair, eyes, and legs. Within her arms, she now held the petrified fox, which looked to have fallen into a state of shock. Jida had somehow managed to warp the little one from her imprisonment to being in her protective grasp. How? Void questioned, as the musician landed hard. From her impact, she created a massive wave of fire that glowed like a starry fall night. Huffing, she spun around in a circle, dragging her foot in the sand, which caused the flames to surround her, the fox, and Void in a barrier. "Void! We gotta get out of here!" Jida bellowed as she watched Lotus and the other glitches shield their eyes from the fire's magnificent light.
Ah, yes, run away, baby horns. Show the dead how much of a coward you are.
Lotus tested, trying to get the spark to make a risky, or more accurately, dumb move. Void! Portal us out of here! I can't hold this for long! Jida demanded with a rise in her voice, as the little kid shoved her fluffy blue head into the guitarist's armpit. Looking from Jida and then to the cackling glitches, Void closed his eyes in regret for not getting to this place sooner. He could have saved it if Jet had been online. Now, not only were this planet's people gone, but their best chance at understanding the constellation patterns was taken with them. Novasun! Jida screamed as her flames began to fully die down. Wincing, Void retracted his axe, activated his arm cannon, and shot a portal open beneath the three of them. One by one, they all fell inside into a place of safety. As the spark crossed through, you could hear the faint words of Lotus from the other side. Or rather, a single word that best described the whole situation. One word that made the spark's skin crawl, and his rage to fester.
See you around!